Joining right now is Annie Linskey, chief national correspondent for the Boston Globe, Jonathan Swan himself, national political reporter at Axios, and Ron Reagan is an author and a political analyst. Thank you all. What a great trio. Let me start with Jonathan. Do you expect Trump, in his usual fashion, to strike out against the sources in this book, including Porter, and attack him personally?
It's very possible this week. So Trump hasn't read the book. The White House got a PDF version of the book last Tuesday night. And aides have been reading through the book and feeding to Trump what they're reading. And one of the things that really struck them was that Gary Cohn and Rob Porter play starring roles in the book. The book opens with Gary Cohn taking a piece of paper of the Korean trade deal off Trump's desk so Trump can't sign the termination. Right. Rob Porter is seemingly on almost every page. So the White House is furious at them, and Trump is furious at them privately. So
will he go after Rob Porter's personal weakness?
He has talked about that privately.
You expect he'll do it publicly?
I wouldn't rule it out. Let
me go to Annie Linskey on this, but there's a couple of questions I want to know. Just straight reporting. What's the mood like in the White House right now? Here's a president accused of not just incompetence, but accused of being dangerous to the republic. This is new.
Yeah, it is new. I mean, the mood is sort of characterized by this sort of frantic passing around of this PDF, this book, which, you know, it's gotten to the point where you even have sources sending it around. You know, I've gotten a copy from White House sources saying, oh, my gosh, have you looked at this portion? Have you looked at this portion? And I think this is one of the sort of most emailed pieces of information in the White House.
They're all doing the search of their name and compiling it. You know.
What's rattling around here? That's strange. Anyway, let me go back to Ron Reagan on this thing. Ron, I've never seen a presidency challenged and told that the people around him are protecting the country from him. That he is not able to tell the truth. He doesn't know reality enough to do it under oath. And this is bizarre stuff, and it's all in the book.
Yes, and one of the stunning things about this is that, of course, this is backed up by the op-ed piece that was written, and also by everybody like the wonderful reporters like Jonathan and all, who for the last, 20 months now, have been hearing from people in the White House just this sort of thing. From the moment Donald Trump entered the Oval Office, this nation was in crisis. We went into crisis. The takeaway from all of this is not who wrote the op-ed or, you know, this thing or that thing about Woodward's book. It's that this president is unfit for office, and this presents us with a national crisis on our hands. Bob Woodward is correct. We're not taking this seriously enough. This could not be more serious.
I think the most striking thing in the book, of course, is the president's inability to understand our role in the world, as every third or fourth grader came to understand it when I was growing up, that we had to protect the world from another world war. And the way to do that was with good alliances, with good intelligence and common sense. Here's what Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders said when asked whether the president can go toe-to-toe with Bob Woodward over the issue of credibility.
Does the president think he can actually win a credibility battle with Bob Woodward? How can he win that credibility battle?
Once again, I think I would certainly rather take the actual on-record account from people who are here, who have been working in this building, who have interacted with the president day in, day out, like General Mattis, like General Kelly, like myself, not disgruntled former employees that refuse to put their name on things when they come out to attack the president.
However, Woodward has stood by his reporting despite the recent statements from the White House officials who have disputed accounts from his book. Here he is.
These people, these are political statements to protect their jobs. Totally understandable. But this is as carefully done as you can do an excavation of the reality of what goes on. Look, my job here is not to psychoanalyze, it's to describe what happened on specific dates in specific moments. And the people there, look, the people who are willing to talk are people of conscience, people of courage, people who said, look, the world needs to know this. If you don't think it's risky for somebody to answer the questions and give in the real details, it is, and they're willing to take that risk because, as Gary Cohn said, got to protect the country.
Ron, I wonder about this president's grasp of reality to this point. Does he know that the public will trust Bob Woodward a lot more than they'll trust him? Woodward's got a pretty good track record. He brought down Nixon on truth. He didn't have any other weapon to bring Nixon down with. All he had was the truth. It was ended up backed up by the tape recordings. That's all he had was truth. And this guy says, I can outmaneuver this guy on truth telling? It's not his weapon of choice. Trump isn't reliable on the truth. He's good at BS. He's good at salesmanship. But truth, that's Woodward's game.
Bob Woodward has a long record for meticulous reporting. None of us sitting here having this conversation, nobody in Washington is going to take Donald Trump's word over Bob Woodward's, but Donald Trump is not necessarily playing to that crowd. And his base will assume that Bob Woodward is just part of the deep state and the elitist, yes, the Trump's base? Yes, absolutely. Nobody else. Everybody else will believe Woodward.
Ryan, I don't even know. I've known Bob Woodward for, 40 years. I don't even know what party he's in. I've never heard a liberal sentiment come out of the guy once, Annie. I don't think he's a lib lab in any way.
He really comes across as just a very sober-minded counterpoint to Trump.
Right.
I thought, the recording that was released to the Washington Post of Donald Trump talking to Bob Woodward it was such a sober-minded individual talking to him very calmly, which is, to your point, it's the exact opposite of Trump's demeanor, which is just to kind of go nuts on something.
Well, let's go to this other question. Now, you got Bob Woodward and everybody. You got Omarosa's book, and then you got Bob Woodward's. Now you get this article running in the New York Times a couple days ago.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.